space that you're in, before we get started, I do want to call attention to this mural behind you. It was a mural that we unveiled in April of this year. And the reason why I want to point attention to it is because one, we're here to celebrate Filipino American History Month, but two, the muralist who painted this mural, and I think it took at least a year to paint it, he's actually from Stockton, born and raised, and he's from the South Side, as well as is Filipino American. So we're really proud of him. If you're curious about the meaning of the mural, we have some printouts right here that go over each of the birds, where the birds are from, and essentially what this is meant to show is that we may be from different communities, right? So not all of us may identify as Filipino in this room, and that's great because you don't have to, but each of these birds represents a different affinity here at UOP. So here at the Center for Identity and Inclusion, we don't just serve deepen and SWANA students. Upstairs we have Black Student Services, we also have El Centro, which serves Latinx students. Down here, as you can see, we have our LGBTQ Resource Center, as well as Native American Student Services. And really what we want to do in this space is create spaces where students and staff and faculty feel really empowered to talk about identity, to talk about racial justice, to talk about intersectionality, and also for us to build community across our differences. We're firm believers that we're just as strong in our differences as much as we are in our similarities. And so we create these spaces so that we can learn about each other's cultures, heritage, and also make friends. So hopefully you all are getting to mingle throughout this event. You'll also have an opportunity to hear from our panelists, and there will be time for Q&A at the end. So if you're curious about anything that any of the panelists say, please keep those questions in mind because we will have time for you to also talk back to the panelists and learn more. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to go through this slideshow, and then we'll get the panel started. But I just want to go over a couple things. So like I was saying, I'll be the moderator for this discussion. I talked a little bit about the mission of CII, which stands for the Center for Identity and Inclusion. I don't know if we have any Delta College students here, maybe? Cool, so we all have, yeah! I also went to Delta College. But if anyone has questions about like our center, about UOP, maybe you are thinking about transferring, please let me know. I'm more than happy to answer some questions. Okay, so I don't want to assume that every single person knows what Filipino American History Month is. But really this is really a time for us to commemorate all of our contributions and achievements that we've contributed to not just America, but also acknowledging that Filipinos have been in the Americas for a long time. If you didn't know, this month commemorates the first recorded arrival of Filipinos in the continental US, which occurred in Morro Bay, California. So believe it or not, we were here in the 1500s already trading and getting to know other people in the Americas. And so this is a really special time where we get to celebrate not only that, but also celebrate where we're going as a community. As y'all know, the Filipino American community in Stockton has a very special place in many of our hearts because of the legacies of social justice movements that have occurred in this community. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, but then we're also here to connect the past to the present and talk about where do we go in the future as Filipino Americans. So what are the goals of this panel discussion? Obviously, we want to inspire not just awareness, but civic engagement. A lot of these panelists who will be speaking to you tonight are very heavily involved, not just in the Filipino American community, but within the social justice community abroad here, and then also nationally, and then also internationally for some of us. So this is a really great space to learn how to get involved if you're not already involved. And at the very end, I'll also plug some events that they have going on that you can also participate in after today. Second, we want to have an intergenerational dialogue. We think that if we don't know history, then we don't know ourselves. So that's why you have multiple people here from multiple generations to talk about not just our history, but also their stories, and in the hopes of that you'll feel inspired, empowered, and also encouraged to reach out for mentorship if that's something you're seeking. And then finally, we're here to help others define the change they want to see in the world. So even though I can and have my own perception of like what social justice looks like and how we can get to a more equitable society, it takes all of us, not just one of us. So we're also here to really help y'all start to think about like what does positive change in our community look like, whether that's at home, your school, or another campus you might couple of their bios, because I recognize you may not know every single of them. So we're going to give a little bit more background as to like their expertise, where they're coming from. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can read this. And I do ask for grace because I know some people are like, oh gosh, I'm going to read from the computer. But I think it's important to highlight these people's backgrounds and also like what they're bringing in terms of their gifts and their talents. So we're going to start with Ma-Fei Yunan. Ma-Fei is the president of our FAHM Stockton chapter. She's best known for her success in the beauty pageant industry, and she's won several prestigious awards both locally and internationally. So before I continue, let's just give it up for Ma-Fei. So if you didn't know, and you can all follow all these people and all these orgs on Instagram as well, I encourage it. But Ma-Fei is known for being Miss Philippines Australia in 1998, and then the Bini Filipinas World 2003 winner as well. And she landed top 5 in the Miss World competition the same year, which was held in Sanya, China. And then also she was Mrs. Philippines Globe in 2008. She's just racking up all the accolades. Love her for it. And she insists on wanting to channel her expertise into image consulting for Bini Filipinas, which is the Miss Philippines pageant. She's been doing that since 2003. And she's taken on the role of personality development director for Miss World Philippines in 2021 and pageant director of Queen Global Pageants, which is the #1 live streaming app in the Philippines. Additionally, Ma-Fei continued on in her journey in expanding her services and entrepreneur expertise by starting up her own company called Ma-Fei Management Consultancy, which was founded in 2015, where she gets to manage talent, spearheads public relations and marketing campaigns. She also does content creation, events management, online show production, and social media management for companies and individuals all over the world. So she is a global girl, and we're so appreciative to her for being here. So thank you for making time. Next, we're going to introduce Erwin Mina, who's sitting over here in the middle. If you want to wave at everyone. Erwin is the board president for our FAHM National Museum, which if you didn't know, it's actually here in Stockton, which is a huge, huge deal for the entire country. And Erwin's story is a powerful testament to resilience and also his commitment to the community. He was originally born in Delano, California, and was raised in a farm labor camp. He actually did a whole screening and panel discussion with different people to go over the Delano Monogs and their contributions to the United Farm Workers movement and how they started. And he also grew up amidst the challenges of the 1960s. So that included the Civil Rights Movement, the Delano Grape Strike, which would then basically power and fuel what is now known today as the United Farm Workers movement, and also the Vietnam War. And as the son of a sacada and a war bride, he was deeply influenced by his parents' struggles and the wisdom of the Manongs who he grew up under, who instilled in him the importance of education and self-respect. So he also went to San Jose State University. He spent the majority of his career in Silicon Valley, and had several leadership roles, executive leadership roles at companies like Siemens, HP, Seagate, and NVIDIA. So if you're like in those industries and you have questions, just feel free to reach out. And now in his retirement, his main sole focus is really just giving back to the Filipino community locally and nationally. And so he's the board president, like I said, of the FAHM National Museum. He does a lot of outreach initiatives, and he's really here to help Filipino Americans connect to their heritage and also to help empower y'all to thrive in a competitive society. So again, if you have career questions, if you have questions about identity or something involved, then we encourage you to speak to both. Okay? So third, on the very end, we have Dr. Bernard James Remolino. He's a national trustee for the FAHM Stockton chapter, and he's also an associate professor of U.S. and Asian American and Pacific American history at San Martino. So, shout out to Delta, shout out to SHW. His doctoral work focused on the history of Filipinx American popular culture, labor, and migration in California during the early 20th century. And he also writes on Filipinx American histories, Asian American popular cultures, and trans-Pacific cultural imaginaries in the Philippines. So Bernard is also a 1.5 generation undocumented immigrant from Makati, Philippines. His family first settled in Stockton amplify the history of struggle, to help build community, and also to make Filipinx experiences a part of the larger fabric of our school. So let's help us with that. And last but not certainly least, we have Hannah Reyes Divino, the director of Filipinx. She goes by she, her, yeah pronouns, and grew up here in South Stockton, and is super grateful to be one of the first students to experience all 4 years of the Little Manila After School program. So shout out to Hannah. And she's had the privilege to witness the beautiful transformation from when the program first started in 2009 until now. Her lived experiences and seeing other P9s in the mental health field actually inspired her to return back to Little Manila Rising as an alumni of LMAS, and then also to help co-create and direct their mental health program called Healing Puso. Puso standing for Filipinx, Uplifting Self, and Others. And she does this work, or started that work because it was in response to the high rates of suicide ideation and mental health struggles among Filipino and Filipinx community members. And so she's been a part of a lot of different movements. She's a part of she was a part of a Filipino statewide policy symposium called Fierce. And because of these experiences, it really inspired her to pursue her master's in social work, which I know you got within the past couple of years, right? So congrats on that. That's a beautiful thing. And also, as like a side note, I encourage y'all to just look up the number of Filipino people who have a post-baccalaureate degree, so like a master's degree or a doctoral degree. It's a really low percentage. So mad props to our brothers and sisters who are encouraging us to go further in our education, and then also showing us that it's possible. I know we also have some grad students. So yeah. And after that, while she was getting her MSW, she was still working with Little Manila to eventually become a therapist. And while the journey wasn't easy, we know that she lost her beloved father during the pandemic in 2021. And after going process, she was also exposed to like the collective grief that was happening with the spike of anti-Asian crimes, and then also the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, which happened started to really amplify in 2020. And so all these experiences like helped her to really decide like this is what I want to do. I want to help people support their mental health and support the community. And so she earned her MSW finally from San Jose State. And she's also a part-time therapist with Speed Therapy. Check them out on Instagram if you have not done so yet. They are a Filipinx-owned practice in San Ramon. And also, the Healing Puso team here in Stockton is making multiple strides to really focus on healing-centered leadership and to normalize mental health struggles and increase access to holistic health and healing opportunities. So she'll show more about what that means, but it also means free therapy. They just launched that, so definitely encourage them. Inspiring, amazing people. I'll leave it at that. So thank you to all of our panelists for sharing more about yourself through your bios. And then we will actually start the panel so that we can hear more from them. Thank you. So like I was saying, so if you're curious, if you're like, wow, they all sound really cool, they do so much like amazing things, how do I get involved? How do I learn more? Can I follow you? Yes, you can. So I just encourage you all to take a picture of these Instagram handles. These are where you can go to for more information about our center, for more information about Healing Puso, which is a program out of Little Manila Rising, and then we also have Fonz's information here too. And as y'all know, a lot of our events and stuff are shared through social media, so this will probably be the best way to stay up to date on like upcoming initiatives and different things that we'll put on. Okay, so now we're gonna get into it. We have a series of panel questions that I'm excited to go through. And each question sort of has its own theme. So this first one is on history and legacy. And I do encourage y'all, whoever feels ready to speak up, just raise your hand and you can start. We won't have necessarily an order, but if you feel really passionately, I definitely encourage you to share your voice. So the first question is, can you share a pivotal moment in Filipino American history that has inspired or shaped your journey as a change maker? In your work, how do you honor the legacy of Filipinx leaders and activists who fought for social justice and freedom in the past? And anyone can start. And you can also take time too.
I guess I can start, and thank you all for being here. Thank you to my students too at my History 34 class for this. And just to maybe start framing this question, I also want to acknowledge that as we meet here, right, we are meeting on the unceded ancestral lands of the Plains Miwok, of the East and of the Yukon. And to just remember that these kind of legacies, these histories, these struggles of indigenous sovereignty are very much tied into the liberation that we're talking about in Filipinx American history. And so to meditate on that as we engage in this discussion as well, because I think we'll circle back to those things in our future questions. And in terms of sort of a pivotal moment in Filipino American history for me, it was actually reading the late Dr. Don Boholano Mabalan's book, Little Manila's in the Heart. There's a passage in there, right, this kind of magnum opus of the history of Filipinos in Stockton and why all roads lead to Stockton, all roads in Filipino American history lead to Stockton. But there's a passage in there in a section about Filipina Americans, right, kind of like where Filipino women, Inays, were in this community building project. And it was this narrative kind of emphasizing this tragedy and this mystery of Celine Navarro. I'm not sure if folks are familiar with this name, and we can talk more about that. Maybe our panelists can also, my co-panelists can also share. But it was this sort of, in 1932, Celine Navarro was buried alive by members of the Caballeros de Dimas Alam and Maria Claras, these fraternal and kind of Masonic organizations by composed of Filipinos. This was 2 years after the murder of Fermin Tobera during the Watsonville riots, right? And so it's this constant sort of barrage from without and from outside and from within of violence, right? But what struck to me, why this struck to me in particular was because it was a particular mode of violence on Filipino women that I think in this larger story of Filipino American history tends to be underemphasized, particularly in this period. There's this grander narrative of Filipino Americans in the early 20th century being primarily male, right? Unattached men, 96% I think is the number, right? And it's telling. And it's also kind of obscuring. We talk about, my students have a big paper coming up on Friday, and we talk about like values and limitations of a source in looking at history, right? Looking at this 96% of men coming in is a good place to start. And then asking ourselves what is included, right? These 4% or so women who are coming in. So Celine Navarro was this mother who was accused of adultery. She was buried alive out in Jersey Island here in the valley, right? And over the course of sort of that looking into sort of that history, right? This complex relationship between Filipinas, both in Filipino American community and in the larger structures of U.S. empire in the United States. And the journey that filmmaker Celine Shimizu is her name. She helped to create this documentary called The Celine Archive. And kind of looking at the process by which there was this uncovering of this story, right? This involvement of the people, the grandchildren, the children of Celine, who are putting forth these little fragments of their memories of their mother or grandmother, and kind of helping to shape out and share out this history, right? That otherwise was occluded, that otherwise was sort of suppressed. That was one of the pivotal moments for me for both thinking what the potentials are for historical storytelling and how we can move with intention as historians, right? Either in the professional sense or in the kind of the grassroots sense. And to the second part of this question, right? How do we honor this legacy of leaders, of activists, and of regular folks who really comprise the bulk of this kind of this push for change. We tell their stories, right? And we do the work not in isolation, but collaboratively. So we ask each other, how do you know this person? Or what do you know of this person or community? And in that sharing of the grander narrative, I think that's how we can at least start honoring that work, honoring that labor, and building from that.
Thank you so much.
So, when I was growing up, the first thing that I realized that was there was nothing on literature on Filipino Americans. So you had to go to college to get this America in the Heart book by Carlos Pelusa. There's a passage in there, and I'm sure I'm going to butcher it, but in the United States it's a crime to be a Filipino. And so what did that mean? When I was growing up in the camps, there were elderly men that were not looked after. They would age out in the fields. When you get old, it's a death sentence. You die. And one in particular was one of the men, and we call him Tata, which means father. Tata Fabio, faith. He was a well-versed man, and probably a professor or a higher educator in the Philippines. So he taught us things about current events through his lenses. And one of the most pivotal moments in my mind was when he died. And that it was a crime because they were not looked after. And that's all they had. And so in order to have that, to make that and honor them, was for him to live on in me, to continue on in education, to continue on with these activisms to help young people know who these people were and how they scaffolded everyone. And so in my mind, the second part would be to continue the legacy of telling stories and making the kids tell their stories, to get identity from their past and perhaps being better equipped to compete in this society. And you will need that. So that's where I would say to answer that question.
I'll go last.
That's my default. I'm not. So, as you heard in the long bio, I was part of Little Manila Rising. I was one of their first students in 2009, and it was founded by Dylan and Alba Riego. And that would be my pivotal moment in history that really shaped my journey, because I wouldn't be where I'm at today if I wasn't a part of Little Manila After School program, which, by the way, you all should check out because it's here in Stockton. And a lot of other communities, they may not have that resource. So if you were to ask me like 10 years ago, like if I would be standing in front of you all, I would probably not, I'd be in disbelief, like, oh, I wouldn't imagine myself up there. But when I've seen like other Pinays that look like me take up spaces and also like talk about the rich history of Filipinos, it motivated me to do the same. So Little Manila, if you didn't know, their whole organization was founded to preserve the last 3 remaining buildings of Little Manila in Stockton. So in the 1920s, 1930s, we were home to the richest population of Filipinos outside of the Philippines. And so a lot of Filipinos would migrate here to Stockton for agricultural work. And a lot of them were a part of like the United Farm Workers movement, and were part of pushing for like better wages and better working conditions. And so I was privileged enough to be a part of that program, and both Dylan and Dawn, our co-founders of Little Manila Rising, dedicated their lives to raising awareness about this rich history, right? Dawn's family was in Stockton, and she talks a lot about it in Little Manila is in the Heart. Dylan, who is our current director, his dad was a Mano. And so a lot of the work is personal, right? A lot of this is because they wanted justice for their own families. They wanted justice for their dad. They wanted justice for the Monoms and Monoms, the elders in that generation. And so to see and hear their story all over again gives me more motivation to do the work that I do. Because they were just like you. They were like in their early 20s. They were in their, I don't know, but like 20s and 30s, right? Like they were just two people wanting to change the world, wanting to make a difference, wanting to put our stories in the center and in the forefront, right? To talk about the rich history of Filipinos. So that energy is what I channel in the work that I'm doing today with Healing Puso. And that has been pivotal for me because they've invested in my own well-being, they've invested in my own leadership, they believed in me and what I had to offer, they believed in the power of my story. And because of that, I was able to pour back into my community. I was able to come back and create Healing Puso because I saw a need to address the mental health struggles in the Filipino community. Because there are so many like mental health struggles in our community that goes unspoken. There's so much stigma. And so, you know, when I reflect on John and Dylan and their legacy, like that is a continuous reminder of why I do the work that I do. Because if they did it, then why can't we do it, right? So,
Yeah, I just give respect to, of course, the modern day leaders of the Filipino Americans. Giving you a background, I was born in the Philippines. Migrated to Australia at 6 years old. I saw the struggle there for Filipino Australians. Fast forward, I wanted to give back and be back with my family in the Philippines. 2002, 2003, I met my husband, who's third generation Southonian. That's the first time I've really experienced Filipino American personally, right? Then fast forward again, just 3 years ago, that's when we moved back finally to Stockton. And I feel as though I'm in my third year of a history lesson, right? Learning about the stories, the leaders that have really paved the way for all of us. For me, my pivotal moment is really volunteering and diving into FAHMs. You know, learning from our current leaders here today, Jim Bonds, Corey, Erwin, and Dr. like Bernard.
It's been a long week.
You know, yeah. And for me, it's, you know, just really intentionally learning our history. I am in love with history because that's what makes me, and that's what makes you who you are today. The freedom of speech, the freedom of walking to a space where we belong. You know, the legacy that we can continue is just respecting what our ancestors have done. And you know what? It's cool now. You know, for me, I think it's just me just diving into the community. Earlier, you heard my bio. I manage talents. I'm actually part of Ruby Ibarra's management team. I'm part of Jocelyn Enriquez's management team. And that just became a chance because I wanted to learn more. I wanted to learn more people's stories. And these are people who are cool today and uses, you know, telling stories with music. And I feel as though that is something that we have to continue. What you love can be in line with what our ancestors have done. And you know, right now, me intentionally, I love to speak to people. So now I have really intentionally asked, you know, fellow leaders of the FAHM's community, or even just community leaders, to sit down with me and tell me, what's your FAHM story? Hey, what's your Filipino American story? Or what is just your story? And you can find that on FAHM's Facebook. I really sit down with leaders, and last night I had the honor to speak with one of the Manos, you know, Mano Robert. And he just had so much to share. 6 minutes was not enough because I'm trying to make it short. I know everybody's attention span is short nowadays, but if you're passionate about it, you listen. And one thing he instilled, or he shared with me, is that at his talks, what he shares with the youth, with the young people, is that ask questions. Your parents, your siblings, talk to them, record it. That's an archive. That's part of history. Because, you know, you just never know what life will bring. You know, your grandparents, we don't know. Our parents, we don't know, right? You have this priceless conversation that you can pass on to your kids, you know, and to their kids. So that one day they're like, oh my gosh, did you know that your great-grandparent did this? You know, having a master's, having your, you know, a PhD, like, wow. Increasing our percentage in that realm of education. So yeah, that's my 2 cents for this.
May
may I also add that, and thank you, Mafe, for kind of framing it kind of like where we are now,
Yeah.
right? And I just kind of also want to emphasize, and students in my class know this was not guaranteed, right? And it was never meant to be. Under these structures of white supremacy, under these structures of capitalism and patriarchy, especially for Asian and Pacific Americans, right? Especially for folks that had been othered, minoritized within these structures. And so for Filipinx Americans, that struggle or that work or kind of getting to this space of like where it is cool now, where like we can go out and kind of like expand on like tell these stories, right? Meet with other folks and connect with folks. That is because of these histories of struggle, right? That is because of the work that the folks that, you know, the Manongs, in conjunction with these struggles for Black liberation, for indigenous sovereignty, right? All intersecting, right? That is something that shouldn't be lost too in this celebration. And that's why we celebrate this month as Filipino American History Month, right? Because history is about these narratives of struggle alongside these sort of celebrations of culture. And I think, you know, like with everything, like with Hannah's work, with Irvin's work, everything, we are building on like existing infrastructures of militant activism, of figuring out ways to care for each other despite these structures that are hell-bent on our annihilation. And that's something that also shouldn't be lost on us.
I wanted to make a comment. She mentioned Robert Rockstock. You see him, he's this older gentleman,
94 years old.
94 years old, still drives to Delano and back.
He does walking tours in San Jose.
Yeah, walking tours. Anyway, so what people don't know about him is he's, in his years, he was anywhere from a deputy sheriff to a rocket scientist. So anytime you pick up that phone, that supercomputer you have in your hand, the technology that he helped put up in space in the shuttles is what you guys enjoy today. So just want to let you guys know that he's not just some old guy. He helped you live your day-to-day lives.
Enjoyed talking to him.
And to that second question, or to the second part, and I guess we can move on because I know there's a bunch of other questions here.
I'm learning a
But
lot.
you know, how do we honor these legacies? It's to make them undeniable, right? Make these stories undeniable by like telling them, sharing them out, adding your own kind of things to that pot. But Filipino American history is U.S. history, right? And we need to make that undeniable.
We're gonna move on, but really quickly, I just want to say thank y'all for your insight, because as y'all keep talking and I'm like processing, I'm sure everyone's kind of like reflecting, internalizing. I heard a couple snaps, a couple of the audience. But something that I forgot who said it, but really this idea of like these spaces were not meant for us, and yet we're still here. And I really feel like that's even the reason why we created this space, right? Not just to celebrate FAHM, but to really showcase stories and narratives that we may not hear in the mainstream local newspaper, right? But this is work that's being done on the ground daily and every single day throughout the week, right? And it's something that's ongoing. And so activism is not just something that happens in the past, right? Like these are all built on legacies that and stories that have really been fought for a long time. And I even think of this space as like a part of that, hopefully, and sort of changing the narrative. We like to say here at CII that we're kind of like the counterculture to the mainstream university as an institution, because, you know, a lot of these institutions don't want us to talk about history. They don't want to talk about like struggles within our communities and the ways that we've had to like literally fight just to sit in this space and be acknowledged and seen as human. And so I'm just really thankful for all of things you've already shared. It really confirms like my experience, but I hope you've heard things that you've also resonated with. Maybe you're still reflecting and trying to process about your own identity, but no, thank you all for the heart and the passion that you delivered in your responses. It really resonated with, I think, a lot of us. And I think it's a great segue to our next question, which is more about this idea of identity and activism. So in your experiences, how do you feel like your Filipina identity has influenced your activism or your leadership style, right? Because we're in this higher education space. We tell kids, go to college so that you can become a productive citizen and get a really good career, and so that, you know, you develop yourself professionally. But how do we think about leadership in this space, and how has your identity influenced your activism and your leadership style? And in what ways do you think the fight for freedom and justice within the Filipinx community intersects with other social movements in the US? So it's a two-tiered question, and feel free to answer whichever first, and then whoever wants to share can go ahead.
Okay, so for me, especially right now, my leadership style is very intentional. It's very, it's got empathy and very compassionate, just coming from a maternal standpoint, I didn't share that in my bio. I have 6 kids, and that's from 24 to 4. For me, whenever I mentor others, I'm also speaking to them, because that is like generations to come for them to, pass on what I'm teaching them. Being a leader doesn't mean, hey, do what I say. No, it's like this. It's interactive. Understanding where the other person is at. What do you understand about this? Because we all have different perspectives, right? Again, going back to the one, this POVs. Everybody has a different POV. But at the end of the day, when you're able to communicate, and that's something that we discussed earlier, is that maybe our ancestors, maybe my great-great-grandparents, or, my parents were very vocal with me, but maybe they did not want to speak to us because they got hurt so badly during their time that they didn't want us to worry about that. They were protecting us in a way to not feel anxious or about to walk in this room, is that person going to beat me down or not welcome me? So for me, my leadership style is really to open communication. And whatever I feel as though the understanding is, then I will support you and reroute you. Like, hey, I suggest this. What do you think about that? Stop there for now.
Okay, so I grew up with people that didn't really talk a lot, because it was the natural way of the Filipinos. And so what that meant to me in my Filipino identity is that they did that for a reason. They asked people and they listened. And so, this is awkward for me because I want to hear from other people right now. But it was all about listening, and I think leadership style would be to basically decipher and get a lot of information from other people, and then become a leader and implement, and with everybody's input. So that to me, that's the hard part for me is we're on a panel and we're talking at you versus listening to you.
I migrated from the Philippines. My family was out in Stockton in the late 90s. I came here in the early 2000s, and when I went to San Joaquin Elementary School, moved out to Tracy for high school, but kind of like stayed around the area for that part of my life, right? And a lot of sort of the ways in which my Filipinx identity has shaped how I move in the world was my positionality as being an undocumented migrant, right? I am on the Deferred Actions for Childhood Arrivals program, so I have my work permit. That's how I can teach at Delta College. But a lot of this experience growing up was this experience of precarity, right? Of not quite knowing where I was gonna land. And that sort of helped to develop this like natural curiosity about like why? Like what were these structures? I wasn't using this language as like a 15-year-old, but like what were the structures, right? Like that were like causing my family so much distress, so much grief, having to go to all of these lawyer meetings and like trying to like craft these narratives to convince people that I belonged in the country. And a lot of that fueled what is maybe now simmering in my age now, but it fueled sort of this like early rage, right? Like, and it really, I needed outlets to kind of funnel that into, and so I looked to history, right? I looked to kind of figuring out ways to explain the kind of like talk about the forest for the trees, if that makes sense, right? And so history became an avenue for that, and I think I very much identify as a historian, both in like professional training, but also in sort of like how I approach things with curiosity and how I encourage folks that I meet to approach things, right? And Irvin was saying, like asking questions, listening. My work, I was a managing editor for Mahalaya newspaper, which you'll find copies in the back there, which is an activist print newspaper, founded in 2022. We're based out in San Francisco, but we talk about and center and amplify the stories of the Filipinx diaspora, right? And part of what I found in the kind of praxis of this storytelling, story gathering was how to let the people whose stories we're centering actually have their stories and actually be the ones to guide kind of where their stories go. You know what I mean? A lot of kind of journalism is very predatory. A lot of it is extractive. And I think kind of these experiences or these encounters with the type of violence of like people trying to control my own narrative or make me kind of control my own narrative very much translated into hopefully some sort of empathy and care in how I kind of engage with that, right? And you know, and maybe this might lead into what Hannah might say, but like a lot of the questions that I engage with kind of internally when I'm speaking with folks is like how do we talk about these histories of the violence that happened to us, the violence that is very much characteristic of our historical memory without re-traumatizing, right? Because we have to talk about this struggle, right? We have to talk about the bad parts or the hard to talk about parts because they happen, right? And like Bell Hooks says, like in order to heal, we need to face the pain, right? We need to sit in that pain in order to find transformation. And so like that's kind of the ethos, a lot of kind of how I try to engage with folks, and hopefully that comes through.
Yeah, I would say for my leadership, part of my bio is always starting off with like, I'm a Pinay, I'm from South Stockton, I'm a second generation immigrant, I was part of LMASP, that's like my biggest core identity, and like what?
Bernard?
Sorry. I got Bernard shared. Like, Pinayism is a huge part of my identity. So I can't remember people's names. But if you all ever heard of Pinayism, which I'm sure you've heard of, it means pain plus love equals growth. So like what Bernard was saying, it's confronting the painful parts of our history. Confronting the painful parts of being a Pinay in present day, being a Pinay historically, right? So I definitely take that, you know, to heart when I'm like doing research or when I'm developing our programs. I always want to put my identity as a Pinay at the forefront. And because I've seen other Pinays in my life take up space and be unapologetic about it, right? And speak their truth, that has motivated me to do the same. Especially in systems and institutions that weren't built for us to thrive, right? Like universities that weren't built for people of color to thrive, right? And so that part of me definitely has led me to want to do the work that I do. So in Healing Puso, one of the most fulfilling parts is being able to be that, I call it femtur, instead of mentor, femtur. So reclaiming our power as women. And so, you know, when I'm mentoring like the different people in our staff, you know, I think of what am I doing now that's motivating the future generations after me to pursue higher education, to pursue social justice, to be involved in movements, to want to give back to their communities, right? So, yeah, I definitely want to pay homage to Dawn, like Dawn and Dr. Allison Tintianco Cubales in San Francisco State, because they talk a lot about Pinayism. They founded Pinayism, right? And it was the sisterhood, it was the connections with their village, it was their connections with women that really sustained their leadership and sustained their movements, right? For social justice, for equity. So, yeah, definitely take that in.
And as y'all are talking, I'm just thinking about like how y'all are even alluding to the second question, which is like how do our struggles for freedom and justice really intersect with other social movements? And as y'all can hear, it's no longer just about race and ethnicity, right? It's about like our gender. It's about our documentation status. It's about even generationally, right? Like ageism is a thing. And as y'all were talking, I'm like, wow, this is part of like our leadership style. If I can like speak for some of us, is very youth-centric, right? So you have a lot of educators, you have a lot of parents in the room, you have mentors who are literally just trying to sow into the next generation. And I think that in and of itself is a leadership quality that I see a lot in the Filipinx community here in Stockton. And it's similar to what Hannah was saying, like if it were not for our predecessors, I would not be able to see myself as like a successor in that movement, as someone that, okay, I am responsible now to have someone pass the torch to me and to feel like empowered in who I am and in my community and my family, to then hopefully pass some of that on to the next generation. And that's also part of like why I do the work that I do. Is like a lot of my work has been not just mental health, not just community, but also working with young people. And I really do think that intergenerational dialogue is super necessary, because that's also how our ancestors made it through, right? Is that they passed those legacies on to their children, to their grandchildren, to the cousins, and to the neighbor down the street. And I think that just speaks to like the leadership of Filipinos in general, right? We're a very communal society. It's each one teach one. It takes a village to raise our own, right? And so it's never been individualistic. And when you look back at some of like our pre-colonial practices, right, across many cultures across the globe, but specifically for Filipinos, we're one of the most relational people in terms of history and where we were prior to colonization, and how we were egalitarian, and really everyone had a part to play. And I see a lot of that same pedagogy being practiced in a lot of these social justice spaces. So I just wanted to point to that, because I think that's really crucial too. And that's also why I feel like a lot of movements here in the Central Valley have been expanding and become successful, is because they went back not just to the youth, but then the elders are also like, what can we do to support? You know, so I'm also thinking about like how y'all's leadership style is also kind of like, how can I become a good elder? Which I feel like a lot of our mentors kind of express that was why they started doing the work that they do. So even if you have little brothers, little cousins, you know, someone is looking up to you, and so the hope is that like you continue to pass that on, and that you also don't have to do that change making alone. I hope that this conversation emphasizes like, if you have questions, if you're like, oh my god, like I don't want to organize a rally, but I don't know how to, definitely like build community in this space, because it takes all of us, right? Not just the elders or the older people, but also all of you. So just wanted to emphasize that. Okay, so how can pride and awareness of our cultures, our histories, strengthen the next generation of activists and community leaders? And I feel like we already started talking about that. And what are some values or traditions within the Filipinx communities that you feel like that have played a significant role in sustaining movements for justice and change? So I'll give it a second for y'all to think about that one.
Well, I think, you know, just to already answer that, Hannah and I, you see, we are loud and proud about what we wear. You know, it's just expressing your culture, or the love for it, or the love for others. I mean, I'm not saying I'm just gonna keep wearing Filipinanas. You know, I wear Hawaiian shirts. I wear, you know, I just love different cultures, and I think it boils down to why I love being in pageants, because I wanted to learn other people's cultures. You know, at the same time represent my own country. And just sorry to backtrack in the previous question too. It aligns to like Pinaism, or just Pinays themselves. In the pageant world, as you can see, the Filipinas are winning. You know, they're finally getting the spotlight, and even our recent Miss Universe, or was it a year ago, Arbany, she's Filipino American. She went through hardships. She almost got disqualified because they, you know, were trying to say that she cheated or things like that. But she came out with pride, and now really, you know, kind of giving her voice into her fashion, because she's a fashion designer. And the way that she does it, she recycles. So I mean, there's power in not speaking as well. I mean, like I said, music, fashion, you know, just being intentional of who you're around or who you're learning from. And I think just answering this question just kind of aligns to all of those arms that you can, you know, view and see and participate in. Because I mean, I think, especially in the Philippines, religion varies. Yes, we're Catholic, but it's either basketball or pageants, you know, or boxing, because the whole entire country stops when Manny Pacquiao is fighting. But hey, that's pride, right? That's really like everybody's united because there's a movement. So, yeah. And I know you talk about boxing a lot. The Bernard has a great.
Is that a segue?
Yes, it is.
No, I mean, I think one of the things as well to kind of consider alongside this, right? This like history of very kind of boisterous cultural expression, again, to kind of, for Filipinos to make themselves undeniable, right? Like these zoot suits, these Macintosh suits from the 20s and 30s, right? The loud fashion, the music, the sport. And then also to remember that for Filipinos in particular, right? There is a long tradition of militant organizing for resistance. And so activists and community leaders can pull from that, not just in the United States context, but in the context of the Philippine Revolution in Spain, right? Like the Filipinos were able to sort of carve out against this colonial power, right? This vastly like powerful entity, a way to sort of make them renege, right? And you know, I like on top of that, right? Kind of understanding and really like emphasizing the importance of the labor of Filipino women, of Pinays who like I recall to like Rocky Rivera's verse in the movie of Us, and talking about how you know and Rocky is talking about addressing Pinays in this verse, saying like you know like one of the greatest privileges that you have is being born a Pinay, and also that your blood contains the mud of over 300 years of resistance, right? And that's not like just like wordplay, like that's rooted in some like real historical fact, right? And so like making people remember, for those of you that want to get plugged in, for those of you that want to kind of start something where they're at, that you don't have to start from scratch, right? That there are these traditions, there are these infrastructures that are already there that we can actively learn from and then build into. Yeah, and I think that like those translate then into like the cultural values, right? Sort of militant, sort of being both loud and soft, like being both sort of like steadfast and also able to provide care. And like kind of push that those like traditions of pushing back, I think, help. Yeah, it helped me anyway.
Yes, yes. Okay, if we don't have any more responses, we can transition to the next question. This is a long one, so we can all spend our time. What advice would you give to Filipinx youth who want to get involved in activism or just in community in general or organizing, but maybe they feel disconnected from their heritage or unsure of where to start? And I feel like you kind of talked about that a little bit. The second question is, how can Filipinx students and young professionals use their unique perspectives and cultural background to influence change in their communities? So 2 different questions. Feel free to answer whichever you feel most passionate about, or both. I can start just while we're folks are ready. I think this is a perfect first segue. I know a lot of you may already be involved in different spaces, whether it's at Delta, Yoki, Stockton, maybe you're just from Stockton, you're just here to support. But I think this is the perfect place, and places like this where it's a continuum of dialogue and stories and reflection. Because I don't think you're meant to process it all in one moment, right? You're not gonna leave the space and be like, yes, I'm gonna start the next, I'm gonna be like the United Farm Workers movement, and we're gonna start a huge movement, and that's great, because you can do that, right? I think if you wanna start somewhere, it really just starts with, like Irwin's been saying, listening, right? So whether it's like coming into these spaces and listening to elders or folks just a little bit older who have some more experiences, who can provide that mentorship, that mentorship. I also think it's about utilizing social media to your advantage, but also disconnecting from places where it might contribute to some toxicity, right? Because I feel like social media, we were talking about this earlier, but like we're so glued to our phones, right? That sometimes we forget like, oh my God, like I'm a human and there are actual humans who can benefit from me just being present or me like saying hi to them, right? And I think it's in daily interactions where that's where some of that community building starts. So like if you're in the Epic Club, if you're a part of one of Dr. Bernard's classes, I think those are entry points usually for students to start, whether it's in the school or at home with your family.
I think it's important that you guys are plugged into what's interesting to you.
Yes.
And I think that instead of waiting, take action.
Yeah.
Just get it done and just go out. I mean, I had friends that found out that there was an apartment complex that didn't have power for like 4 days. That's wrong in many levels. So they went out and they went out and found who was in charge of that, and then found who could be the ATAC that can help them. And so all of a sudden, all these things are starting to roll. You got to go out and just start. Get it. Just don't wait for someone to tell you to do it. There's plenty out there for you to find.
I have a great anecdote for that. Let me think of this. And I'll uplift Donald in this case. So if y'all didn't know, one of our friends is Donald Donaire. They go by they them pronouns. They're one of our first, maybe not the first, but like one of technically the first group of school board members who's like openly queer, openly non-binary. They're from Stockton. They're like perfect. And I want to tell y'all this story because it actually relates to what you were saying. So back in the day before we finished college, we would come home for the summer. I think we were out south at Meddy Harold Park. We were chilling under the stars during one summer evening. And I had been going to Donald's family's house out South Stockton for a while just to hang out. And I had noticed that the street lights at the park were on. And the entire summer they were off. So I was just curious. I'm like, oh, is there something going on? Like the street lights are on. And they're like never on over here at this park. And Donald was like, oh, it's because they weren't. And I'm like, well, how did they turn on? Is it like an event? And Donald basically told me that they figured out how to contact the city because like their family and like, you know, they have little brothers, cousins and whatnot. They have a lot of family gatherings. Like they want to play basketball. They just want to play basketball in the evening times, right? And so Donald found the number to the city, emailed someone, called someone, and then the lights got turned on. And it may seem really minuscule and tiny, but to me, I was so inspired that I was like, I don't even know who I would call to like turn these city lights on. So the fact that we put in the effort, and also it doesn't just benefit you and your family, like it benefits this whole neighborhood. Because now people can feel safe and like actually have lighting if they want to, you know, do recreational stuff in the park at night. But that for me was a very pivotal moment of like seeing like a young person take initiative, and it just happened to be my friend. And it kind of explains how we all ended up here now, right? Like we're doing the work that we do, but it's because of that curiosity that I think you're talking about. Like they were curious why the lights wouldn't come on, and they took action and took initiative to like make some change happen. And so that's a really small example, but there's so many ways in which like that can happen. So I just wanted to share that story because it applies to these things.
I'll also plug in Little Manila Rising's youth program. So I know I'm part of the mental health program, but we also had a mental health youth advocates program. We have the Little Manila After School program. We have environmental justice, asthma mitigation, and mental health youth advocates. So if anybody is interested in being involved, I would say start there. I think like Little Manila Rising and Fawns is like a good place to start, especially if you're curious in how you could get involved in the community. Because we not only are involved in local change, but also statewide change. There's opportunities for you to be involved in advocacy efforts on a statewide level. So sometimes we have advocacy days at the Capitol in Sacramento where you could literally bring your stories, bring your struggles, bring the needs in your community and talk to different policymakers and people in positions of power so that we can inform change in our community, not only in Stockton, but San Joaquin County and statewide. Right? And a good example is like ethnic studies. Like our students, like I'm so proud of our students. Like our Little Manila After School program students helped to advocate for ethnic studies in SUSD, and now we were able to like bring in that person in the back, which is my partner Jay. He was also a Little Manila After School program student, and now he's an ethnic studies teacher at Stag High School, right? And it's because of our Little Manila After School program students. Our young people who believed in themselves, who believed in their voices, who shared their stories so that they could make the changes that they wanted to see in the community, so that they could learn the history of Filipinos. So they don't have to go to college, they don't have to go to higher education to learn about their ancestors and learn about the contributions of Filipinos. And now, like, we have Filipino American studies in high schools as well, right? And a lot of this was, again, not only because of our Little Manila After School program students, because of our ancestors who have paved the way so that we can do this, right? There is a long fight for ethnic studies to be in the university in the first place, and our students help to build upon that, right? Because they believe their stories matter. They believe that we should continue to talk about our history. So, yeah, start with Little Manila, follow us, check out our Fawns Museum. I think sometimes a university could be secluded from the nonprofits and existing work and initiatives and coalitions, but it's definitely out there. And I see familiar faces for sure. I've seen you in like our epic wellness workshop, so shout out to y'all. That's definitely a good start. Yeah.
I was at the 7th annual FAHM International Book Fest in San Francisco last weekend, and amongst the amazing keynotes there, one of the things that stuck out to me and that was commented on by several of the authors that were debuting their works was that there are so many, like this moment is kind of the conditions of opportunity are right to learn more about Filipinx identity and heritage. There are so many books, so many things being published, but also like there's so many children's books being published. And so like I was going to say like y'all should like read more, but actually y'all should read more children's books. Because I think like that like is also very like energizing and like inspiring and like creative, right? And so like you don't need to limit yourselves to like acquiring knowledge through these dense texts, right? Like you can do that, and that like if that's good. But like I mean I read children's books all the time because I get tired, you know, and like I want to be able to kind of like also like feel energized. And so there's a different type of energy that comes from receiving and viewing this art and seeing the labor that goes into it, and then also learning about like parts of my heritage, parts of my identity, and then maybe that can lead to somewhere, right? Maybe that can also energize you to like maybe dig deeper then into like, okay, I want to look more into this, and then that's where you can break out like the more like grittier text or whatever, or like Gail Masanta and John published a Journey for Justice about their Indian, right? And Bridge Delta Publishing, it's like it's meant as like a children's book kind of, but not really. Like because like the back has like an extensive bibliography and it's like very like well researched, very accessible. And so there are different ways that you can mediate these things, right? Like knowledge and kind of engaging in like these types of histories, these types of like acquisitions, like don't necessarily need to come from like what we think of maybe as traditional history books, right? Like we can kind of expand that purview or that perspective.
I agree. I agree in the sense that it's not just going to come from a book or a hard book or like a really hard class. A lot of it is in our art. It is in the popular culture. Thankfully now, right? Like we were saying, it's a lot more prevalent, and so we have a lot more sources to go to. But I encourage y'all, use all the sources that you can, not just like literary sources, but also like again, performance art, YouTube videos, comic books. Like there's so many ways that you can learn, and it's not just through one medium. So just wanted to emphasize that it's multi-modal.
One thing, and Tony Bambara talks about like in the revolution of the arts, right? And so like if we're trying to kind of establish this revolution and how we engage in our own histories and tell these stories more expanded, then we have to look at the arts and the culture makers and the culture here, as well as whoever we think of as these kind of like traditional things. But like there's so much more that our community, so much.
So intersectionality and solidarity. How can the Filipinx community build stronger solidarity with other communities of color in their fight for justice and equality? What are some ways Filipinx changemakers can create or have created coalitions and work across cultural and racial boundaries to address issues that impact all marginalized groups? I'll share something really quickly while our panelists reflect on their responses. I will say, it's just really going outside of yourself. That's where it starts, right? I can say for myself, growing up in Stockton, right, like, especially being a part of like what I consider like the Southeast Asian community, it's really strong here, right? But I can say like I wasn't exposed as much to other people's cultures and histories until I had that opportunity to, and the privilege to go to higher education and literally be exposed to people outside of Stockton, from other races and ethnicities and religious backgrounds and socioeconomic backgrounds. And I feel really, again, privileged, lucky that I was able to be exposed to other people's stories in a short amount of time, because right, that's kind of the point of higher education is you go not just to get a job, to get a degree, major in something that you're passionate about, but also to network, right, to meet other people. And I always used to say when I was at UC Santa Cruz, like, that I would not have had as much passion or desire or curiosity to learn about my history if it weren't for like my Black and brown comrades that weren't Filipino, that shared their histories with me, and that served as my entry point to say, okay, like if that happened for you and your family, or for the past several generations in your community, I wonder how it happened for my community. And that's literally organically how I was able to start that work of like, not just networking, because that's very like, it's very white supremacist language in my opinion, but really building community and building relationships that are founded in trust, right, in empathy, in respect, and even learning what respect meant to other people in other cultures, right? If you didn't know, the etymology or the origin of that word is re-inspect, to see again. And so it was being able to see other people again, to see histories in different ways, that I felt like I was able to cross like ethnic and racial boundaries, and still to this day, like a lot of my loved ones and the people who helped build me up intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, to be able to do this work, right? It's not just Filipinx people, it's people from multiple backgrounds. And so I think that solidarity work starts with your relationships, right? It's not just you being involved with Little Manila Rising and Fonz, it's also like getting involved in other communities, right? We have a lot of different organizations and spaces that are serving multiple people, not just based on like racial or ethnic background, but also like socioeconomic status, right? We have a lot of people living below the poverty line in our community, and so that doesn't just affect Filipinx people, though it does, right, in different ways. And so connecting those struggles to other people's struggles, finding those spaces where you build community and build that sense of chosen family, I think is what helped me, again, understand other people's struggles for justice and equality. And then also, like, they advocate for me, like, I'm gonna advocate for them, right? So it's not just talking about Filipinx history, it's talking about like, yo, we had a whole movement in the 1960s. Like, yes, we had hella Filipino students that were a part of the Third World Liberation movement. And those were the students at SF State that really like helped found that ethnic studies movement, right? But it was also Black students, Latinx students from multiple regions all coming together to say, hey, not only does your history matter, but so does ours, and we should come together because we're stronger in numbers and we have something to say. So I think that's kind of how I think about it. I don't know if anyone else wants to.
I'm going to talk in the perspective of what I do. That's the online presence. We discussed earlier with Missy that yes, we all have a phone. There's no more yellow pages, white pages. I don't know if you even know what that is. But those are the times where you had to really research people's names, right? You had to research people's companies or services that you needed for a need. Social media is so powerful. Podcasts is so powerful. I built my own because I wanted to save lives online. That was my tagline. Especially during the pandemic, I still wanted to continue the conversations and I guess reconnect with people that were just home that are usually busy. And same goes with this. We can unite and utilize our online presence for a mission, for a purpose, not just random, let me post this, let me post that. Post it, but have some substance. Ask yourself that question, who am I trying to inspire? Who am I trying to teach? What kind of legacy am I, targeting, right? Because at the end of the day, whatever we post, it lives there forever. Well, unless you delete it. But if you want something to live there forever, then for me, again, going back to my maternal instinct, I want him to understand what I was passionate about. I want him to pass it on, to share hey guys, follow this, and things like that. Because for me, history is cool. You know, what urban experience, I seriously, I would go in his brain and just like look like, oh my gosh, what did you experience? History is such a blessing to us. And the biggest gift that we can pass on to is being able to share it. So now, we've got this tool, what are you gonna do about it? You know? Are you gonna just keep scrolling, or are you gonna really lift that voice up for especially the people that have passed, that can't speak anymore? We have to be the ones to keep the legacy going.
I think to piggyback on this is, you know, when we go and transverse different ethnic groups, we have more in common than we also. If you find the truth that all of us have in common, I think that the technology for me would be to find that, and then with the technology that exists in my career. It was one thing to be able to communicate in the United States, but if you went to Japan and Thailand and Singapore and China and you communicate that, then I think that's how you gain common ground, and that's how you would do it. I'm afraid you hit it right on the head. It has to have purpose and substance, but then with the common ground of the truth and what you have in common.
I was speaking the other month with Juanita Tamayo Lat, who was one of the folks that was in the ethnic studies strike at San Francisco State in '68, and she was one of the only Filipino. I think she was the only Filipino American that helped to actually like write the new ethnic studies curriculum that came out for the College of Ethnic Studies. And she was saying, you know, she was sharing how like a lot of the way that they were able to sort of move forward alongside the Black students, the Chicano students. Was that the white folk knew how to give them space, right, to work, right? They knew how to be there kind of in solidarity physically, but they knew to kind of allow them to lead. And I think this idea of sort of thinking about, or this new relationality that we have, the space in the context of phones, social media, and all of that, right? Like, how do we take up space in these new kind of modes of interaction that doesn't kind of override or dismiss kind of this, like other people's stories, right? It's just, I don't know the answer. It's just like a question to kind of like reflect on. But it's this idea of kind of like now there are different ways that we can show up intentionally for people, and then we can use kind of social media to amplify that struggle. So like for me, it's helping to kind of bring awareness to the work of Gazan poets right now who are actively publishing poetry and trying to get it out there while they are actively facing their genocide, right? So it's my alarm saying
Apologies, y'all. It's probably,
yeah.
yep, it was a book. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Right, and it's again this kind of idea of, you know, social media as a tool, these cultural products as tools to reorient how we can show up in physical ways as well, right? How we can build critical mass in these multiple platforms. And then also it's like how do we mobilize, and these are just questions that I'm throwing out there for y'all to think about, like how do we mobilize this and put into like praxis this notion of like our liberation is tied together, right? And like that is not something that we're going to be able to kind of have actionable sort of like progress toward achieving just behind the screen, but the screen can maybe be a platform or a tool for that. But again, yeah, kind of like how do we amplify people's voices? How do we allow? How do we show up without taking up space, right? Like or allowing other folks to utilize the spaces that they're in to do the work that they're trying to do, and to know that there's going to be hands that are going to hold them up, like when they're tired, you know? Because that's what being in solidarity is about, right? It's not just kind of marching next to each other at rallies. It's not just that, but it's understanding kind of this deep work of like outside of what we can see. Like how are you there for folks, you know? And I think it's like that's what maybe we can use social media for, or that's what we can use these platforms for. Is to organize in the digital space, but then to figure out how to move that organization into these physical spaces, then we can take over like here, right? Like kind of like how can we kind of like add some radical practices to what we're talking about? But yeah, just some things to consider.
Thank y'all so much. Like, such a great conversation. I know we wanted to have some time for some Q&A. We have 3 questions left, so just as a time check, it's 7:08, so I just want to make sure we're all good on time, just so we're mindful. So we might not be able to talk as much maybe on these last questions, but definitely want to have everyone have a chance to share their thoughts. So this comes back to this question about the here and now, right? The present day and contemporary challenges. What do you think are the most pressing issues facing the Filipinx community today? Or what is one issue maybe that is facing the Filipinx community that you want to uplift? Whether it's in the US or if it's abroad? And how can individuals and institutions address these challenges? And anyone can feel free to start.
I guess, you know, my husband and I were both like, well, I was born there but left, so I became a Phil foreigner. When we went back to the Philippines, I was not Filipino enough, and he wasn't either because we didn't speak, you know, with a certain slang or dress, I guess, appropriately. We showed too much skin, especially for me. It was hot, come on now. So that's one thing that we were trying to do while we were there, is just really educate, especially for foreigners who want to move back. Okay, do your research, because there's a different kind of perspective in the Philippines. You know, they're more bold to tell you how you look. You don't speak English, so you're not Filipino. You know, and I think it still happens with the older generation who are who grew up in the Philippines. They love to say, instead of, hi, how are you? Oh my gosh, you gained weight. Oh my gosh, you lost weight. I was like, I miss you too, Lola, or your grandma, right? Okay. And it's like normal, right? But sometimes the youth don't understand that. Like, why she was criticizing the way I look? And you know, our comedian, like our famous comedian Joke Boy, always talks about that. But it's funny, but it's real. You know, so for me, I mean, for my experience, that's what I would love to connect, is like the old generation ways to the modern ways on like respecting each other, or understanding where they're coming from, and also understanding where the younger ones are coming from, because there is a huge disconnect. You know, me just growing up with my grandparents, I just knew that was just the way it was. But of course, I have to express that to my kids, like, you should say that I'm fat. Like, I'm just like, that's just, you know, your grandma telling you that you're healthy. But you know, like, that's not normal. But yeah, that was the challenge, or it still is a challenge.
But it is like those comments like can be really demeaning, and they could really harm people's mental health. And they can like internalize that and start to think about their self-worth and their beauty standards, right? Because like growing up, we were told, like I was told, like don't go outside, you're gonna get too dark, right? And that's rooted in white supremacy. That's rooted in colorism. That's rooted in hating ourselves and colonial mentality, thinking that we're not beautiful enough or that we're not worthy enough, right? And so I think that comments like those, like these are the types of discussions and maybe traumatizing, you know, conversations that might affect our current generation today, and you know, even previous generations, they also have their own trauma, right? They were doing their best to survive, right? So there is like, when I think about the pressing issues, it is that intergenerational trauma that often gets passed down. And Healing Pusa, we just had a workshop at EPIC at Delta College to talk about that, right? Like, what was the struggles that our parents have gone through, that their parents' have gone through, but also what can we do to break those cycles of trauma, right? What can we do to heal from that trauma? And you know, sometimes trauma and mental health conditions show up in our bodies. So Filipinos also struggle with like hypertension. They struggle with diabetes, and a lot of that is linked to mental health conditions. I know when I was studying in undergrad, they said that a lot of Asian American communities express or show their mental health struggles somatically or through their bodies. So a lot of stress kind of comes up. Like, I don't know if you all heard, like, you give me high blood pressure, right? Like, that's rooted in stress, right? And that's rooted in maybe some mental health struggles that don't really get spoken in the households and families, right? So they're feeling this up through Little Middle Rising, and even in a lot of Filipino mental health initiatives, they talk about this, right? They create spaces for generations to heal, to unlearn together, to have those hard conversations, right? To mend those relationships. Right?
I think that's a perfect segue for what we just experienced. The COVID crisis.
Wow.
And you think about a whole generation of people that were not able to go to dances, proms, going out. They didn't even graduate. They did a drive-by. So there's a whole generation of people out there that need to have that addressed. And I'm not sure how that should be done, but I love what the lawyer is doing. But from an overall holistic, all the universities, I think they really need to be addressed, because there is a whole bunch of people out there that, you know, but not just Filipinos, that don't, they internalize it, but they don't express it. So, I love what you just said. And, I think we need to step up as a society, educationally, everything.
Understanding too that a lot of that, right, like, is rooted in these histories of U.S. imperialism. It's rooted in these histories of U.S. civic colonization, right? The ways that the trauma that is inherited generationally from these like histories and processes of resistance is also very strange. And kind of being able to think about how to address that mindfully and with patience is important. And the other thing that I wanted to affirm all of that, because thank you, it's validating what I'm also going over in therapy. So thank you. But I also want to kind of talk about pressing issues, right? Like this, like in the Philippines in particular, the struggle for lumat, right? The kind of struggle for indigenous liberation and sovereignty, as well as how it intersects with the environmental impacts of continued U.S. settler colonization, of continued sort of lines of U.S. white supremacy, or of Western white supremacy kind of invested kind of in maintaining these structures, these racial regimes of domination, right? Bringing awareness to that, and bringing awareness to the fact that it is all connected to continental struggles for land back, right? For struggles with indigenous Hawaiians, with struggles for people in West Asia or siblings in Palestine, right? Like all of that is deeply kind of intertwined. And understanding that it's not a siloed thing, but like reckoning with all of it can get overwhelming. But that's why we have community, right? Like we don't ever have to go through this alone, and we don't ever have to know all of the answers individually, right? Because this struggle is collective. It always has been, like you were saying. And maybe, I don't know, like we've seen sort of rumblings of how we can make institutions kind of see us in that way. But also understanding that sometimes there are limits to the institution, to what institutional power is willing to concede. And so we maybe have to make those spaces on our own, like going to Japan, like going out and seeing that problem and doing something about it.
Just to add, like in the marketing world, corporate businesses, I was part of Filipino Models Association in the Philippines. Reason why that was created, actually my aunt and my uncle created that back in the 80s, is because they were being underpaid as models. That part, and then the other part is that some brands didn't hire morena skin because we were too black. They wanted lighter models, to the point that they started hiring Brazilians. And I'm just like, hello, we're in the Philippines. So we argued that, and I experienced it. I heard clients speak on like, I was just like, rude, And I thank my parents for, I guess, migrating to Australia because I had a strong core. But I saw my fellow Filipino models get cry because they lost the breadwinners of their families. Yeah. And I'm just like, that's BS. That's not right. So yeah, I experienced it firsthand. Not getting jobs because of the way I look. And I was in the Philippines. I'm just like, I would expect this in Australia, but not in the Philippines, you know. So that's something that like I'm glad and proud about it, like, you know, because hey, Pinays are winning pageants that we deserve. We deserve to be on these billboards. We deserve to have work alongside other, you know, television models or, you know, other cultures that demand. And, you know, just like, again, we talked about Ruby, she has, guys, I highly suggest you listen to Ruby and Mara's songs because it's very real. She talks about the, you know, she was trying to wash her skin to where it finally goes white, but hey, it doesn't happen, you know, only that just doesn't happen, you know, and she was feeling so depressed because why is she not white enough when Morena's beautiful, you know what I mean? And again, it goes with the influences, you know, of that we're influencing, I guess, the Filipinos to be a certain way instead of look. So, yeah, that's a huge challenge.
So much. And honestly too, like, I think, you know, I'm sensing feelings of just like, not just the empathy that like we're getting to understand and like, because we're literally practicing what we're preaching, right? Like, we have a group of people who are actually listening and having to practice empathy, and they may not exactly know your life story, but they're like, dang, I've been through a moment like that, but like my mom was like, oh, you're too dark, you're too fat, you're not skinny enough, or ooh, like blend in because we need to assimilate because we don't want to be seen, we don't want to be punished, right? And it's, I just appreciate and I'm so grateful for like that boldness, that loudness of this entire panel. We only have a couple more questions left, and then we'll close out. But I hope and really feel the gratitude in this room. I just want to thank y'all for sharing those hard stories, those hard struggles.
Maybe you want to discuss. Everybody's tripping out.
Yeah.
You want to ask some questions?
Yeah,
You guys
so
have any questions? Let's just go to
we will
questions.
kind of
Yeah.
speed through this last section because we did have questions left, but we recognize it's getting later. So I do want to open it up, like Monica
Please,
said,
guys.
if anyone has questions for our
Thanks for
panelists.
staying.
Yeah, thank you for staying.
Yeah, we're like, I have a midterm.
Yeah. Any questions for our panelists? And it's okay, we'll give you some time to think.
Are you guys enjoying?
Yeah.
Everybody's
Things are going out.
Yeah.
Want to make sure. Yeah.
Questions, Questions?
Curiosities.
I think
I know.
I know, I see you formulating it in your
He
head.
was here since the very beginning.
I got a lighthearted question or
Yeah.
just like fill space while I think of something like your favorite food.
Oh gosh, that's not
It's finally time.
You're asking Filipinos.
I know. Like here in Stockton or just in general?
Filipino food. Sorry.
You need to feel butter. That's such a hard question. But if I'm trying to like, oh, what am I be getting for dinner? I'm probably like this, like Japanese.
Nice.
I love Thai food. I could eat that every day.
Oh gosh, yeah, I love all that. And Filipino food.
I'm trying to think of, so being a high school teacher, what would you, I guess like what would you tell your high school self, like when you were 14, 15, given like the context of, you know, like back then, you know, I mean, Hannah mentioned like if she were to ask herself like 10 years ago, or someone were to ask her like would she envision this and the role that y'all are playing in like the Filipino American story, like what advice would you give? Because I mean, I'm sure that there's still a lot of youth who have not, what's the word that I'm like what's the term I'm looking for? Like they haven't opened the right door for their opportunity kind of thing. So that's, I mean, like what would you?
Can I say something? If I was to go back and the first time I learned about Filipino history or anything to do with Filipino and American history was freshman year in college. And so my response was, my dad would ask, what are you learning in school today? And I bring out this Carlos Balusa on America the Heart. And he goes, what's that name? He goes, I knew his brother. And I said, no, I guess everybody knows his brother, but my dad never joked. He was a real serious man. And then about 44 years later, I was researching his Congressional Gold Medal and his naturalization citizenship paper read Aurelio Pelusa. And so instead of me asking, hey Pop, how do you know these guys? I asked for keys to go hang out with my friends. But what I'm trying to say is, tell your 15-year-old self to ask questions about your dad, about your family. Write it down. I was lucky enough to have my nephew take a Don Navarro class at Cal Berkeley. And one of the things she made him do was to go back and interview my mom, his grandma. And so years later, I was kind of interviewing my mom and kicking off all the things she said based on what the interview was in 2002 on Mother's Day. So always go back to the question, write it down, document it. Because at the end of the day, when I want to see my mom, she passed away in 2020. I'll put on that DVD and I'll relive that. And that will be part of you forever. And I promise you it will be very, very fulfilling to ask you a question. That's what I would say.
Ask questions. Just like you asked us what's your favorite food. That's something that I wish I asked more of my grandma, my mama, my dad's mom. I spent a lot of time with her, and yeah, it can bring me back to memory lane. Like it's crazy. Like why were you putting oil in my hair? Or did you put my hair out? Or just those simple questions.
What was your name?
Jay.
Jay?
Yes.
Yeah. It's tough, huh? Tough to get high school.
You should come by the museum sometime.
Exactly.
Bring your
Sometimes
daughter.
it's lessons, sometimes.
That's my shameful day.
No, it's good.
No, the
Shout out
senior
to
students
Jay.
do a little bit of work.
Yeah, shout out to Jay who this past Saturday gave a presentation with some other.
We didn't have that, so you're exactly what the old monument would say is to make yourself relevant, educate yourself and make yourself relevant, and then pay it forward. There you go. They'd be happy to see you.
I think I would tell my whatever high school self, 15-year-old self, you're not always going to be okay, and that's okay. But it's going to be all right, because you're not going to be alone. And I think 13-year-old me, 18-year-old me, hell, like 28-year-old me, always needed that affirmation. And like I'm 32, turning 33, and I still kind of like have to work that into the practice, right? But like knowing what I know now and experiencing what I experienced, that's what I
I think one more thing would be that when you're that age, things might not be that good in your life, but it will get better. Then everything will pass, and everything will come out in the wash. And it'll be really a positive ordeal.
I would also say that if I were talking to my younger self, that my story matters. I think that would be the most important because it was Filipino after school program that inspired me to go to higher education, and I went to like a Filipino youth conference, and in that conference, like I was really seen, you know, and it was a really safe space for me to like talk about my story and talk about my beloved dad who passed away in 2021 in the pandemic. Right, that was the first time that I was actually comfortable talking about my story. Right, and so that's what I would tell my younger self, that your story matters, right? That there's hope, that there's people out there that are there to support you, that there's community out there who want to see you thrive. So yeah, I would probably say that. I love that question. Yeah.
Question now. So how do you challenge tradition this stem from is wanting to meet expectations of your elders or people above you, and sometimes the expectations are a little high. So
Well, I think, you know, like the older generation only want is to communicate, you know, communication. And like for Filipino culture, there's a lot of, I guess, respect ways, just like if you see it, I mean, this was passed down to me, is if you see an elderly, you kind of get their hand and bless them. Right? So not a lot of children do that. It's not passed down. I told my kids they forget sometimes, and when they do, the elders go, whoa, where'd you learn that from? You know? So there's like a fun way of passing it on, but there's also like just you, just act upon that respect. Because if other people see you do that, then they'll question it. So then it kind of like opens up the conversation of why do you do that? Why do you say that? Like in Filipino as well, elders who kind of give them like a saying like, instead of just thank you, you say po. Thank you po. That's just an endearment of okay, I respect you as an elder. You know, so those things can still be passed on. I think I heard about students earlier, like you know, they're practicing the language and they would add that. So it's you know, it's a trend, but you know, at the same time you're respecting the elders, and it's just taking gratitude. You know, God, thank you for giving me a voice, basically. I don't think it's disrespectful in a way. They know, it's hard times to really pass on everything that they were used to.
First thing that comes to mind when you're talking about expectations, I think of the stereotypical like Filipino parent who wants you to be in the medical field and wants you to be a nurse or like pursue engineering and STEM stuff, right? But then like, you know, here we are in these different different fields and we're still thriving, right? We still love what we're doing. We're choosing a new path, we're choosing, you know, ourselves. And I think it's about honoring, like maybe this is what our parents have expected us to do, but ultimately we all have the autonomy and control to like lead our future, right? I know if we say that to our parents, they're like, excuse me, I'm just kidding. But like also recognizing that you have the power to like choose the fields that you want to go into, and also to say no. Because I also noticed, even my mom, like she also, I feel like previous generations, because they're so used to surviving and like going and going, right? It's like they always want to keep working. And even on my mom's day off, she always wants to keep working. And if you're like sitting down, it's like, why aren't you working? Right? And so it's this mindset of like, you have to constantly do things. You have to like pursue these like specific careers, right? But part of being in another generation is also like, again, determining what makes you happy at the end of the day, what makes you feel fulfilled, right? And managing those expectations and knowing that to hold those boundaries. Because you can only say so much. I feel like I'm talking therapy again. Again, I'm a therapist on the side, so I talk about this with different people. But yeah, it's about ultimately being able to say no, unlearning capitalism, unlearning the ways that our parents have been taught to survive, and being okay with slowing down, right? We don't always have to be doing something, right? Part of the social justice movement feels like we always have to respond with some urgency. But part of the movement is also slowing down. It's about doing the inner work. It's about going to therapy. It's about healing. It's about being in community and choosing yourself, right? And I know that that's also a privilege, right? Some people don't have a privilege. But yeah, when you're talking about that, that's what kind of comes to mind.
Like running over the trauma response. And I was speaking with a Filipino American poet, performance artist, TJ from Mandel. He's organizing Filipinos out in Argentina. And it's been a while since I talked with him, but when we checked in, he was talking about kind of like this organizing work, this kind of activist work, this kind of community work, he was likening it to kind of like lifting weights at the gym. And oftentimes you don't feel kind of like what's so heavy, right? Because you're kind of focused on like maintaining this weight. But when's like, to Hannah's point, when's the last time we stopped to just breathe? Like to exhale. And like what does that exhaling do? It helps us to like, it encourages us to release that weight, even if just for a little bit, right? And then we can kind of continue doing that work. I'm butchering his words, but like that's essentially what I'm saying, you know, that, and like taking time to breathe, right? Taking time to understand, like check in with our bodies and feel where we're at so that we can better show up for the folks that are around.
Does that answer your question? Yeah, I'm not sure. But I think you have to be really comfortable. Like you said, you have to take time for yourself. And you have to understand that you have to be comfortable in your own skin. And you have to own that. And then when people have these expectations of you higher or what that doesn't align with you, they have to own it too. So at this point I'm saying just be you.
And model, right, like model these alternative ways of being and living that are an extension of these pathways to success that your parents might have or your elders might have envisioned for you. Right? My mom was a medical doctor in the Philippines. She wanted me to become a medical doctor. Look at me now. Right? Like tattoo, like she was like don't get any tattoos on your face, please. But like, it's like one of those things, right? There's also a kind of this like negative talk of tattooing, like tattoos in the Philippines, right? Like, and to kind of show that like I can be this and be me, and also show that like I can also be plugged in all of these ways, you know, and like still like I can be all right because like what our parents and our elders are looking for is for us to like be safe, right? And like we're showing each other how we keep each other safe.
Thank you so much, everyone. Let's give a big round of applause. And to just continue plugging more spaces where you can continue to be in community, support some of the amazing work and communities that they're building actively here in Stockton, statewide, and then nationally and internationally. I tried to put as many events as I could. Some of them are for CII, so if you're on campus, we do have some upcoming events. But I tried to highlight some of the Healing Tober stuff that's coming up. A lot of holistic healing and artistic activities that are available to pretty much the entire community. So if you want to take a picture, this is the first slide of events that are happening throughout October. And then we'll give folks a second to quickly just take a picture. But yes, all of these are free. All of these are open to the community. You can come, your parents can come, your little sister can come. Everyone can enjoy these spaces. They are not exclusive to any one specific kind of person. And then here is the next slide, which includes more events throughout the end of October, leading into November, ending it off with the health and healing clinics. I know y'all will be doing that too.
Also, on a serious note, if you are interested in therapy, that is a new service under Healing Puso, and everything is free. So if you or somebody who may be interested in therapy or group therapy, we do have a support group coming up next week. So